I'm Dr. Sophie Messager, and this is the Wisdom Messenger podcast. In this show, I interview pioneers in women's health and personal development about groundbreaking concepts that help women reclaim lost knowledge and restore inner wisdom. By bridging insights from ancient traditions and modern research, we question stale cultural narratives and midwife a new paradigm around birth, life transitions, and women's autonomy. Join me as we delve into stories and studies that empower women to reconnect with their inner voice and live their truth. Tune in as we rediscover what it means to fully trust ourselves and shape our collective future. In this episode, I interview Kate Codrington, and we discuss the changes of consciousness during perimenopause and menopause. Kate is a mentor. She's the author of 2 books, Second Spring, The Self-Care and Guide to Menopause, and The Perimenopause Journal. Kate is also a speaker, a facilitator, a 30-year therapist, someone who guides people through perimenopause both individually and in groups. We explore the natural inward journey that often conflicts with society's expectations, Kate's seasonal framework for understanding our life changes, and practical wisdom for navigating this transformative time. So welcome to this episode of the Wisdom Messenger, and today I'm delighted to host Kate Codrington, who is a menopause mentor, and I've had to write the list of everything Kate does because there's so many things I can't hold them all in my head, but Kate is a mentor. She's like the author of a book called Second Spring, which is a self-care guide to menopause, and the Perimenopause Journal. She's a speaker, a facilitator. She's a 30-year therapist, a nature guide, Yoga Nidra meditation guide, not Nigra, host of Life and Inside Job podcast, and someone who generally guides professionals and people through, perimenopause, both individually and in groups. And I wondered if we can try to have like a little potted history of how you got where you are. We was laughing because we wonder if there would be enough time to cover Kate's life history in just the whole episode of the podcast. But I really like stories of people's life stories, because I think they're relatable. And they're never like some kind of nice, smooth, exponential curve of growth. They do all these weird and wonderful things, and exactly. I would like to hear about your weird and wonderful things.
Weird and wonderfulness. Yeah, well, that's kind of out there for everyone to see, I think. Well, my professional narrative has been driven by my own needs by my own discomfort, and where I am uncomfortable and in need of, I hesitate to say healing, but a different way of being, looking for a different way of being, perhaps. So when I started, I was it was 92, in the mid-90s, no, early 90s, I guess, back in the last century. And I had grown up in quite I would say kind of upper class, repressive, white Protestant culture where emotions were not appreciated, and duty and service, particularly service to patriarchal ideals, was the thing. So you can imagine how I got on with that. So I think, from my perspective now, looking back at that, I would understand it as moving towards reclaiming myself, reclaiming my body, reclaiming my, well, I would say womb space maybe now, but to reclaiming the self, I think, to find out who I was, and because at that point I wasn't able to be intimate with friends really, or with lovers. So there was a moving towards that, and that took me through the craziness of 1980s encounter growth workshops. Thank goodness those don't exist anymore. That's a great relief. And I came to through Reiki and then massage, and then I was massaging away at people's shoulders and wondering why they came back every week after week with the same stuff. So I then dived into body psychotherapy, and I did 2 trainings, quite long. So I was in training and therapy for about 7 years or something like that. And by the end of that, I was kind of, I see now that I'd kind of landed in the world. So that was about, I don't know, early 30s maybe.
Yeah.
I think. And I've just seen you transcribing this. Every time I say this, and I really don't like talking about my own story, it comes out differently. So I'm feeling my way through the dark.
Yeah.
with it.
You don't have to talk in great details about your own story. For me, it's more like so that people are listening, understand how you got where you are, maybe professionally.
Yeah.
You don't have to go into details about your the growth of development of yourself if that doesn't feel comfortable.
Yeah, it doesn't really, because the main thing I notice is that we create stories for ourselves based on wherever we are in our lives.
Yeah.
And we change the story depending on where we are. So you're getting a version here from where I am looking back now. And at the end of that, I met my partner, had a couple of kids, and then I started to my eyes were opened from that experience about the state of pregnant bodies, the state of birthing, the state of postnatal, and I went to study shiatsu and massage and movement with Susanna Yates at Wellmother. And then again, then there was a sort of whole parenting years. And then the next thing that came up was, of course, perimenopause, although that was mixed in with, I had kids when I was in my late 30s. So I was essentially perimenopausal when I had children. But when I finally became aware of what was happening, I then went off to discover about that. It didn't exist at that point.
Yeah.
It hadn't been invented yet. And I trained in abdominal and womb massage.
Yeah.
So working with the digestion, with the womb, with breath, hands-on, doing that kind of thing, with fertility and for perimenopause. And that led me naturally into learning and working at Red School, which is a menstruality educational institution, and Yoga Nidra and womb yoga with Umajin Smotuli, and and there you are. I think that, and then I have many other interests that I follow through courses and training and movement and stuff. But it's all guided by me landing at some rite of passage going, what the fuck? About this stuff, and more people know about those birth and perimenopause now, but at that point they didn't. And I think it's rare to find practitioners or writers or people who can really talk in a grounded and expansive way and guide you through those processes. Very.
But I'd say whilst more people are aware of it, and I'd be curious to hear what your experience is, I've noticed it, and I think we might actually even do a little bit of definition there, which is, I believe that the average woman in the UK, and in most of the modern world, has no consciousness of the process of what actually happens during perimenopause. Most people think still that menopause is what happens when you stop bleeding, but the whole idea that there's a much bigger thing that happens for 10 to 15 years beforehand, it's not in the sort of mainstream consciousness.
I think it's much more so. It's much more so. In the UK, Davina McCall made a couple of television programs. 2022 was it?
Yeah.
And since then, there is more awareness that perimenopause will happen. But I think, well, sorry, I think what I notice is that there's a great deal more awareness.
Yeah.
So many more people know about it. They talk. I was in getting my car fixed, and they were talking about it in the office of the motor mechanics place. You know, it's really normalized. It's really normalized. It's talked about all the time. Of course, I have a particular ears for it,
Yeah,
but I
yeah,
hear
yeah.
about it a lot, really in mainstream places where it really didn't exist before. And along parallel with the rise in awareness comes the rise in opinions about what should happen, what ought to happen, what your experience ought to be.
Yeah.
So there's both an expansion and a narrowing of narrative. And I think that is happening.
And that leads us very well into the next question, which is, and that you've just made me think of another one which will come behind that one, but
Yeah.
Because this here, this season of the podcast, the topic is consciousness. So I'd love to hear what you see happen to women's sort of shift in consciousness whilst they're going through the perimenopause and the menopause. And maybe just very briefly before you say that, explain from roughly what age we can expect women to experience perimenopause, because I think it might be a lot sooner than women believe it to be.
It is, yeah. If you are Southeast Asian, or Caribbean or South Asian, then perimenopause generally comes much earlier, like as early as early 30s.
Early 30s.
Yeah.
Wow, even I didn't.
I don't have the statistics, the figures in front of me, but the average, yeah, I'm not going to say what, I'm not going to guess at it, but it's about 5 or 6 years earlier than for white women.
Wow.
In the UK. So if you think about the average age for white women is 51. So that would mean for menopause, that is.
Yeah, when you stop bleeding, yeah.
That's a year since.
A year after you stop.
Since a year of no periods. 51 white women in the UK. That means that between 45 and 55 is also normal for someone to be in menopause, for a white woman.
Yeah.
Right? So if perimenopause lasts between 2 and 10 years,
yeah,
then potentially you would be in perimenopause. You could be in perimenopause at 35.
Does that mean that fertility drops a lot earlier as well? Because then it just like.
Can you say that again?
Does that mean that fertility drops a lot earlier as well for women who are very early?
Fertility is an area of magic and spirit and weirdness. So I am not going to go there.
Okay.
Because many people have children right into their 40s.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about is a shift in maybe we define perimenopause.
Yeah.
Perimenopause is defined as changes in mood, a change in your period, and hot flushes. If those three are present, you're likely to be in perimenopause. There isn't any test that will definitively tell you if you're in perimenopause. There are many people that will go and sell you some.
Yeah.
The only reliable test that's available will tell you if you are in postmenopause, i.e. if your periods have stopped completely for at least a year. And then the hormone balance is significantly different.
Yeah.
So perimenopause is defined by symptom.
Yeah. Okay, so back to the consciousness then.
Yeah.
Because now the fascinating thing is, it's like, we live in a world that likes to define things very like, this is how it is for everyone kind of stuff.
I know.
Yeah.
And I can talk in, so what, that's really beautiful that you've said that right now, because everything that I say, I am using a broad brushstroke about the shift in consciousness.
Yeah.
Because everybody is absolutely so unique. There is your experience is as unique as your fingerprint, and and as valid as your fingerprints. Just because you have anxiety and flooding instead of PMT and hot flushes doesn't invalidate your experience.
And you know, I have an agenda when I'm asking you that question, because for me, the whole idea of consciousness is to give another narrative to what is presented still as mainstream, which is menopause, perimenopause is horrible, you get hot flashes, you dry up, you're old, you're getting this and that, and we need to medicate you, because that's the other question I want to ask about it afterwards.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. I know you keep asking me and I keep going off.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep
yeah, keep herding me around like a sheepdog.
Yeah. broad brush is about what you see happens to women's, you know, consciousness in this broader sense, you know, the change they go through in the same way that women go changes through puberty. But
yeah. So what happens is a shift towards an internal focus. Okay. So in our teens and 30s, we are very much outward focused and focusing on how we can meet the world, how we can receive validation in the world, explore the world, receive validation. And then there comes a time as we deepen into perimenopause, where the prospect of the outside world becomes absolutely unappealing and exhausting. And we require the volume to be turned down on everything. From people, the way people eat, the way people breathe, which can be profoundly irritating, to light, smells, time alone, quietness. Internal focus requires space and a connection with the earth. And typically what happens is, because people don't know about this is not, it's becoming more common knowledge, but it's less widely known than hot flushes. So people feel the call to be alone, the call to care for themselves and deepen their relationship with themselves, a call to a deep intimacy with themselves in a way that they never have done before. They feel that call, but they also regard it as selfish and impossible and ridiculous, and there's no time for that, because they have to show up and perform being nice and being multitasking and being super caring and doing all the things, so that there is a typically, particularly at the beginning of perimenopause, a colossal conflict between inner and outer, between performing and the intimate relationship with the self. And that is profoundly painful and messy and hideous, and goes on for quite a while. That's perimenopause. Yeah. And at some point, there is a reckoning, a reconciliation, a surrender, a release of shoulds and oughts and patriarchal narratives about how you should show up in the world, and more peace comes with the surrender.
That's fascinating.
And it's profound. It's profoundly uncomfortable, because in order to move through and arrive at that point, there aren't any shortcuts. Even if you've trained for a long time at Red School, as I did, it's still we are still required to open up. It's kind of like opening up the beliefs we made as young girls, in adolescence, or the whatever we absorbed when we were first having a period, at our menarche, our first period, all those issues that were surrounding us at that point will come up again. So with, 60%, at least 60% of people having experienced sexual invasions and violations, this will emerge again but it emerges again for healing. It emerges again as a sort of, because perimenopause is a rite of passage. The contracts you make about how to be female, how to be a woman, if that's how you identify, or all these things about a woman is ... however you fill in those dots will come up again and be challenged, and we are required to release those beliefs. We are required to let them go. In fact, it's a bit like being picked up by the scruff of your neck and given a good shake.
Yeah. I think it's Brené Brown who says menopause is the universe taking you by the shoulder and shaking you and saying, stop fucking around and show your gifts. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Do you happen to know what cultures that still recognize the menopause for the huge transformation into wisdom that it is? Do you happen to know what they do to support women? Does it still exist around the world today? And if yes,
I don't know. Yeah. I'm not sure. There are certainly cultures where older women are more respected, where the elderly are more respected, where things are easier. I don't know. No, I'm not even going to say anything about that because I'm not really sure.
Yeah, no.
I don't really know. I don't have enough information to be able to pronounce on that.
Yeah, because for me, I see a huge parallel in, the lack of support during the postpartum, the lack of like a circle of wise women holding the new mother through the postpartum, and the lack of a circle of wise women. So women who've already gone through it all, but are part of your community and are like basically there to provide, a mix of like practical support, emotional support, information support, the stuff doulas do basically. That's not there, but it's not there at any of those positions. But I think it's.
I mean, we live in in our society, we're so fractured. We move away from our families. We tend to socialize in one generation. That it's very common for people not to have very much older people around living in their houses, say, in the way that used to. So that kind of informal community chit chat, less common.
Yeah. So the listening to you, I find myself immediately thinking, would love to hear what your take is on how HRT plays a role in the process.
What plays a role?
How HRT,
HRT.
how HRT, like hormone replacement therapy, how that fits within the reality of what women need to go through. And I know it's not like it's never a black and white thing. And I did reach out to you when going through the midst of like the worst cauldron crucible thing of 2 or 3 years ago. I actually did take HRT for 18 months because I was so dysregulated I couldn't function. And you were very helpful to me in having a more balanced view. But I would really like to hear what you think of that, because I'm not going to say what I think. I'd like to hear what your view is.
Yeah, well, HRT is great. It's when we are stuck, and I mean the difficulty is there's hormone fluctuations in perimenopause. That's what causes difficulty. And then there's the whole of rest of life. So women in midlife will likely be exhausted, working for lower wages. They will be doing lots of unpaid emotional labor. They'll be doing more of the chores. They'll be doing more of the childcare. They will be holding a ton of stuff. They will be holding the financial responsibility in the household. They'll be doing all these things at a time there's so much violence and war at the moment, and we will be feeling that, and we will be holding that in our consciousness as well. But plus there's a lifetime of gendered systemic injustice, plus trauma, plus early childhood traumas, which they will be holding, which will be making, and you will be chronically stressed because you've been working 3 jobs for 30 years. So taking some medication for hormones is great. And there's all this.
Yeah.
I don't know, is this video?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, so I'm
Video as well as audio. Yeah.
wondering if people will see them. Yeah, you're holding massive life stress as well. So the taking medication to help manage your hormones will not help you manage that massive life stress. So people often ask me, what do you think? Should I, shouldn't I? I think it's really helpful when, it's kind of, as you said, when your life becomes unmanageable.
Yeah.
And often HRT can help us to have a better relationship with ourselves. Because, as you said, you were dysregulated, it can bring us into a place where we can then put in the self-care. We can put in stuff. We can start to negotiate and navigate our way out of commitments and plan for different ways of being, and I don't know, do budgets and figure out how to manage your pension and do all those sorts of things. You can't do those if you're chronically sleep deprived and you're feeling like a complete nutjob. You just can't. So and HRT doesn't always work. We are so unique and completely different that for one person, one formulation will work, and for somebody else, something completely different. And for somebody else, not really at all. And for somebody else, they'll have symptoms. Somebody else will say, I feel great. The only way to find out is to, if you're interested, is to try it.
Yeah.
Start low with a low dose, go very slowly, and track everything.
Yeah.
So track your symptoms, whatever your symptoms are. Write down any kind of changes in diet. I would definitely keep a food diary for a while. One always eats better. Eats better when you keep one of those beastly things. Notice what you're eating, other stressful events, see what's going on, and see if it's working for you.
Yeah. And do you think that it potentially could hold some kind of transformation?
No.
You
just like
you were designed,
you were designed to move from a child consciousness through puberty to an adult consciousness. We are designed to move from a midlife consciousness through to a postmenopausal consciousness. The longer we fight aging, the longer we fight awareness, the harder it is. It's not to do with the medication, it's to do with our attitude, it's to do with our relationship with ourselves. That's what the important thing is.
Yeah.
If I feel, if you are really terrified of aging, if you feel that your validation entirely rests on being nubile, being young, nubile, and attractive to men, then you will have a big old fight on your hands, because you are going to age. If you're lucky, if you get really lucky, you're gonna age. And in our culture, if you're heterosexual, men are programmed to dislike older women,
especially opinionated older women.
Especially bossy, opinionated ones who don't take any bullshit. And we are too. That ageism is within everyone. It's within me. It's within you. It's just there, right? But working on being with the discomfort as we look in the mirror every day is part of the process of surrendering into aging and facing death. And that you asked about changing consciousness. through the perimenopause years and the menopausal transition year, we face the fact of our mortality and we face death.
Mm.
And what we do with that is then a matter of, I don't know, personality and education, I think.
And then you were talking about, the move towards an inward focus. What comes after that, because there's also a recognition in a holistic view of menopause that with the transition comes more wisdom, more power. Even again, that's not something that's talked about in the mainstream. I'm curious to hear.
It's talked about a lot in the circles that I move in.
Yeah.
And I think that it can become just as restrictive and toxic, because because we're feeling vulnerable and humbled, and our identity is gone, and crucially, we don't know where we're going. We don't know what we're becoming. Here's a big bit of consciousness. We are required to sit in the unknown.
Yeah.
For some considerable amount of time. And if somebody comes along going, oh, you're so wise, and oh, the wisdom of menopause, it really doesn't help. It's really, fuck you, and fuck your wisdom. And I'm 9 years post-menopause.
It's a bit like telling a new mother, isn't it great? Embrace every moment. It's always lovely.
Exactly.
They go so fast.
Oh, it's the precious years. And you're
because, I think that's the thing. Our culture is so like boxing in, and so there's both the horror and the beauty side by side.
You're on the nose. So what I'm really interested in currently is the potential for embracing both, for embracing the paradox of both, and that in itself allows us to soften around these binary, rigid structures that we, say, oh, okay, so I'm not dried up, a dried up old miserable bitter prune, so I must be a wise woman. Like neither of them, they're both archetypes.
Yeah, yeah.
But to hold both, well, there's part of me that is really in grief and really feeling the loss of my fresh eyes, my hopefulness, because there's a facing of a reckoning, a facing of reality that happens through this process. And part of me has a deep reverence for life.
Yeah.
And it's both.
Mm.
It's both. And by holding both as being true, then we get a bit more curious, a bit more spacious, we get more flowy, and both can be true.
Yeah.
What did you ask me? Can't remember.
It was about the power and the wisdom, and you've answered.
Wisdom, the wisdom.
And I'd also really be curious to hear more about what you said about that women, they go inward and they need more connection to themselves, more connection to the earth. I'd like you to speak more about the connection to the earth and why it's important. Because as I listen to you, I can see a very clear thread of my reconnection to nature started through the perimenopause in a major, major way. And I'd not quite put the two and two together until I heard you speak that. I felt it was more, in my case, a process of this re-regulation, which probably is. But I'm just curious to hear how that fits with your experience of the.
In the second half of life, our calling and our purpose become more urgent, become more insistent. And we become more and more ourselves, and less bound by identity and roles and binaries and that kind of thing. So we reattune to what is really important. And I'm sure listeners and viewers will know about the grandmother theory, how orcas, can't remember now, but how orca whales who live long beyond menopause, long beyond their fertile years, have the knowledge of where to find fish in hard times. So orca pods with older females, the older females will ensure that the younger generation is fed by virtue of their knowledge, their wisdom.
Yeah.
So post-menopause, there is some imperative that we live our wisdom and pass it on. And you know, people, again, this can easily, I really want people to hold that in the loosest, flowiest, easiest, most spacious way.
Not in another way to straitjacket yourself.
Yeah, exactly. That can easily become, oh my God, I have to know my thing. So
something else to beat yourself with.
It's another kind of, another way that we're failing, another thing on the to-do list, you know, like, yeah.
I'm not 100% wise and sing all of the time.
Yeah. But the thing is that this is, just as we made it from pre-puberty to adulthood, this is happening anyway. And probably, my impression is, probably we would only see it in retrospect.
Yeah.
Like, when I think, I mean, Sharon Blackie, I spent a day with her at a workshop, and she said, there's no, I don't think she swore, but she said there's no bloody point in 30-year-olds going to a Live Your Purpose workshop. They should just get on with life. Do it. It's after menopause that becomes really, really clear. And you're doing it anyway, in your smile, in the way that you greet the milkman. I've got a milkman. Maybe milkmen don't really exist in the rest of the world. I live in
I go to a raw milk farm where they have a small herd of what you call
cows.
The Jersey cows, and the cows are kept with them. The calves are kept with their mothers. So yeah, it's very special. So they don't deliver. I go there.
Yeah.
But,
So that, you know, that little anecdote about the way that you collect your milk gives us a resonance of your purpose in life. So when you talk about coming closer to the earth, clearly the biggest crisis, one of the biggest global crises we're facing is the change in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And I noticed that women more women are more sensitized to this than cis men, I observe. And this becomes stronger later in life. So there's that. So there is a calling to serve the earth, to serve the community post-menopause. That's one layer of it. The other layer is that through Red School, there is a seasonal map that takes us through the spring and summer of teens and 20s and 30s, expansive, worldly, through the autumn and winter of menopause, inward, sensitized, releasing, and through into a second spring and second summer, expansive and worldly again. So there is an invitation to expand back into the world post-menopause to serve the world.
Yeah.
And that requires time. Well, again, it requires a good connection with your intuition, you know, quite a lot of recalibration with your values, with what is important to you and what is not. Because, you know, we're human. We're always getting seduced off down little shiny things in our life that look like a great idea, but they're not. And then coming back into, okay, so what is really important here? Because time is short.
Yeah.
You know, maybe by the end of, when you land post-menopause, might be 55, 60, maybe you have maybe you have 20 years, maybe not. Hopefully you'll have good health. We don't know. Hopefully I'll have good health. I don't know how long I have. So it becomes a real, you know, that's the facing death part. So if there is not long, how will I live today if I'm going to die tomorrow? It's a real wake-up call, and it's very clarifying, highly clarifying. Yes, consciousness. Moya McGinley talks about having death on her shoulder. And yeah, you know, for people who would like a practice, a lovely practice to recalibrate with their values and really tune into what's important, have an imaginary conversation with your 80-year-old self, with your 90-year-old self, or 70-year-old self, or, you know, your older self, and see what she has to say about what is important now.
And with all of the topics we've covered, I'm just wondering, especially because you just mentioned a practice, given that so many women are going through this while still being outward facing in the world, while not having often still raising children, still being, you know, basically raising children, still being like a partner, and still being working, and sometimes all of that at once. Do you have suggestion of practices that are possible to, small practices that are possible to build into? Because, you know, I know that Alexandra Pope in her book about the menopause, she talks about taking a menopause sabbatical, and when I remember reading about that, I was like, fuck yeah, I want that, but you know, it ain't gonna happen anytime soon. So I like to give, you know, I really like to give people practical stuff they can do in the real world we live in today. And I'm just wondering if you could suggest stuff.
Sure. I think people already know what they like. I think people, if for people listening, think about the things that bring you into your body and and make you feel calm or full of pleasure and happiness and joy, and do more of that. Sure, you know, you know, I can pull out 1,000 breathing practices and a mantra and some way of moving your body, and I'm a huge fan of Yoga Nidra, which is a guided meditation. But you already know, and this is the problem with that, where we started with, you know, with so many, with the narrowing of opinions about what we should do. It's so important that people know that they already have the answers.
Yeah, I know.
You already know what kind of food suits your body. You already know whether you can drink coffee or not, and how much. You already know what alcohol does to your body, and what what stress does to your body. And you'll probably have some ideas about what calms you down and brings you back to yourself, what brings you back into your relationship with yourself. Do that.
Yeah.
This is not, in a way, this is not the time to start introducing new things. You want to fall back into the familiar, the safe, the reassuring, the nourishing.
See, I find that interesting because I did the opposite. I went through a lot of new practices, which are now part of my life, and nourishing, and they're all movement and rhythm based.
Yeah.
So one of the things, for instance, I noticed that somebody was asking me that the other day, why do you think that's the case? I started year-round wild swimming, including in freezing water, about 7 years ago. And I've noticed that the majority of people who take part in that are midlife women.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So life will, you know, you fall into what is comfortable, or life will take you into the right experience. But really trust that you've got this.
Yeah.
The experiences will be delivered if you can be open enough. So the practices that are, again, broad brushstrokes, really helpful are slowing down, resting more, moving more, and at its most simplest, increasing nourishment and reducing toxicity right across the board. You know, socially, food-wise, people often use exercise as another stick to beat themselves. You know, where is the nourishment? Do more of that, reduce the toxicity. And when, like you, who adopted many new things, the new things will come in if you give them space, and if you notice, if you have enough space to notice how they're affecting you. Because there must have been some moment when, say with the drumming or the water, that there must have been some moment when you noticed in your body that, oh, well, that you noticed a yes, an internal yes. I could try that, or how would that be? And then you moved, you tried it, and it, you know, slowly it became part of the practice.
What I find quite interesting is, for me, there was a desire to spend more time feeling spacious, and that very clearly was connected to being in nature.
Yeah.
And so the wild swimming ticked all those boxes. But
Yeah.
what I didn't know is that with the wild swimming would come an entire community of people. And then I also started 5 rhythm dancing, which is a form of mindful medication. Medication.
Medication. Movement medication.
Yeah. And the community, and that's, you know, what I loved is we're hearing you say earlier that in our life we often only hang out with similar age group. Well, what I love about my 5 rhythm community is there's people in their 20s and people in their 70s,
Yeah,
and
lovely.
everything else in between. And I noticed that very keenly because there are very few spaces where this actually happens. And then through those people, that's how I got involved into Wheel of the Year ceremonies, which added a layer of connection to nature. And now it's all embedded in my life as normal, and I don't even think about it. But I wonder if what your take is on the importance at this time of life for women to belong to a community. When you were talking about detoxifying, because I've also noticed a lot of women lose a lot of friends. That people talk about that in as a topic in the field of perimenopause, because suddenly if you reassess your value, you're not going to put up with the people that you don't feel aligned to anymore. So yeah, what's your view on that?
Oh, it's essential. It's absolutely essential. We can't do this by ourselves. And it's, you know, living in this culture, it's really hard to give time for yourself to make spaciousness possibility in your life, to change your habits, to change your practices. It's essential that we have validation for that, and have other people, you know, cheering us on, having a team, cheerleaders in community, and it makes the process, it normalizes the process, and it's not so long ago that women in perimenopause, the ones with opinions, like that's pretty much everybody, and who are angry, that's pretty much everybody, were locked up or medicated or put on, you know, Mother's Little Helper. They were stuck on Valium, you know, in the 60s.
What's Mother's Little Helper? Sorry.
Mother's Little Helper? Mother's Little Helper, a Valium, it's a
Oh yeah, sorry, I thought you were talking about a movement. You're talking about the fact that Valium was considered something that basically...
Yeah, because if you're angry and you're furious at life, then obviously you need to calm the fuck down. And before that, women were incarcerated in mental institutions at that same point, and made to feel mad. And, you know, people often say, oh, I feel as though I'm going mad. And that's what they're describing is the process of shedding identities. And that requires some holding as we remove the layers of armor.
Yeah, I've heard quite a few women say they felt lonely.
Yeah. Yeah.
They feel they don't have a community.
Yeah.
And that's what, I don't know what do you have that in your practice? Do people share?
I generally recommend that people, if people are feeling lonely and don't have sympathetic people in their orbit that they go find, go fetch. Create for yourself a community of people going through this process at the same time. And, you know, social media is toxic in many ways, but it has opened us up, has opened up communities. So there are many nourishing Facebook communities, which can then turn into real life stuff if you are very isolated.
Yeah.
And I, you know, highly recommend to trust your body response. If your body has a no about someone, trust that. If you have a yes to someone, be brave. Be brave and say, hello, will you be my friend? You know, to step up and to really call in the community.
I've noticed that in the drumming community, it's also full of midlife women. Surprise, surprise. Yeah. Do you notice at this time of life, people, you know, women are like also speaking up a lot more and making more noise and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, yes, that's definitely a thing, and it's to do with the shift in estrogen. And when in our fertile years, the estrogen fuels the social nervous system. And there are good evolutionary reasons for that, because we need other people to look after the kids while we're going to kill chickens, bears, whatever you're eating, or pick berries, or, you know, going about your life. You need a community. But as estrogen shifts, we lose that social nervous system sensitivity. We don't need to fit in so much. We don't need approval and validation from other people so much, generally. So it's just easier to say stuff and easier to speak up. And we also have less of a filter about what we say. And also we see injustice very clearly. I think that's a massive consciousness shift post-menopause, that injustice becomes blindingly obvious. It becomes really, really clear in a way that we maybe could gloss over it or stuff it down or make it okay or live with it in some way much more easily when we have a menstrual cycle. And post-menopause, we just can't. So for those reasons, perimenopausal, menopausal and post-menopausal people are much more vocal and much more engaged in justice, whether it's for the planet or social justice or what have you.
So I think that sort of brings us quite nicely to wrapping up our conversation, because otherwise I know there's a lot more to cover than what we've covered. But I wondered, Kate, if you'd like to share for people listening where they can find you, what stuff you have available, and that kind of things.
Yeah, my website is Kate Codrington with 1d.co.uk. And if you go there, you can find a whole library of resources, lots of Yoga Nidra. You can find maps of the life season, the different seasons of life, what might trip you up, what might support you in those times. There are Nidras for pretty much everything, for dealing with the unknown, for hot flushes, for doing your taxes, for pleasure of all kinds. Did we talk about pleasure? We haven't talked about pleasure.
No, you can give it a few more minutes if you want to talk about
you
pleasure.
asked about practices, and then I went off on one about something, but great practice, more pleasure.
Yeah.
Whatever is pleasurable. Definitely orgasms help us so good for you. In terms of erotic pleasure, if that's not available, watching funny movies and find a child to play with, you know, pleasure of eating slowly, pleasure of all kinds is the perfect medication for perimenopause. Anyway, yeah, so where I am. So yeah, so there's this whole library of stuff that will support you if you want practices, like there's a ton of them there.
Yeah.
You can go find them there, and they're all free. And I'm on Instagram at Kate_Codrington. I post there regularly. What do I have coming? The main thing what do I have? Well, I have monthly Yoga Nidras that connect you to the earth. So bringing you into the season of wherever we are in the year and resting. So there's that. I have groups for mentoring professionals in the wellbeing industry who want to use the seasonal lens. I have a perimenopause group which operates also once a year. Various live workshops coming up. Oh, I have one in London actually. I'd like to talk about that. About the making friends with using the symptoms as a way to come closer to yourself, come closer to your soul, come closer to your purpose. So that's in early July. That's a lot of fun. Pretty juicy weekend in Paddington. There's lots of things. I do lots of different things. A couple of books, Second Spring. Also the perimenopause journal. If you want to track and notice how you are, bring more kindness, more compassion, more connection with the earth into your life, then the perimenopause journal is a beautiful, gentle way.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Pleasure.
I really enjoyed our chat, and
Yeah, me too.
I hope it will be very valuable to lots of people listening to this episode. Thank you again, Kate.
Thank you, Sophie.